It was late evening. The streets were almost empty, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. A man walked slowly down the road, his hands in his pockets, thinking about nothing important. The streetlights flickered above him, buzzing softly, while the cold wind brushed against his face. He was used to walking alone at night. It gave him time to clear his mind. But that night, something felt different. Something in the air was strange, like he was being watched. His steps grew slower, his eyes scanning the shadows at the corner of every street. And then, he saw her. At first, he thought it was just a shadow, a trick of the light. But no, it was a small figure sitting by the side of the road, a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. Her clothes were torn, dirty, and hanging loosely from her thin body. Her hair was messy, her face pale. But it was her eyes that froze him in place, wide, dark eyes that looked both empty and desperate. She sat on the ground, her knees pulled close to her chest, her arms wrapped around them like she was trying to disappear. For a moment, the man wondered if he should keep walking. Maybe she was waiting for someone. Maybe this wasn't his business. But then he heard it, her stomach growling, loud in the silence, the sound of hunger. He felt a wave of guilt. The man slowly approached, careful not to scare her. "Hey," he said softly, his voice low, almost gentle. "Are you okay?" The girl lifted her head. She didn't speak, but her eyes locked on his, and for a second, he felt something he couldn't explain. Fear, sadness, and something else. Something strange. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, her small hand reached forward, pointing at the bag of food he carried from the store. The man hesitated. He looked at the bag. It wasn't much. Just some bread, some fruit, and a bottle of water. He thought about his own dinner, about going home to his quiet apartment. But then he looked at her again, her thin arms, her trembling body, the hollow look in her eyes. Without another thought, he crouched down and pulled out a piece of bread. He handed it to her slowly, like one might offer food to a scared animal. She snatched it from his hand, faster than he expected. For a moment, she stared at the bread like it was the most precious thing she had ever seen. Then she bit into it, devouring it with desperate speed. The man watched in silence, his chest heavy with something he didn't quite understand. Pity, yes, but also curiosity. He gave her some more, an apple, a bottle of water. She ate as if she hadn't touched food in days. Her hands shook with every bite, her breathing sharp and quick. It was painful to watch, yet impossible to look away. When she finally slowed down, she glanced up at him. For the first time, a faint trace of a smile touched her lips, but it was small, fragile, and gone in an instant. "Where are your parents?" he asked softly. The girl froze, her body tensed, her eyes darting away from him. She hugged her knees tighter and shook her head. The man frowned. "Are you lost?" Again, no answer. She just stared at him, those dark eyes filled with something he couldn't name. Then without warning, she stood up. Her movements were quick, almost too quick, like she was ready to run. "Wait," the man said, standing as well. But before he could take a step, she was already moving. The girl ran into the darkness of the alley, her small figure disappearing between the shadows. The man stood there, frozen. He thought about chasing her, but his legs wouldn't move. Something about the way she looked at him, those eyes, had unsettled him deeply. He stayed there for a long moment, staring into the empty alley where she had vanished. The wind picked up, carrying a strange, sharp chill. He shivered and finally turned to walk home, though his thoughts were far from calm. Who was she? Why was she out here alone, starving like that? And why did it feel like she wasn't just a lost little girl? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her, something hidden, something beyond his understanding. As he reached his apartment and closed the door behind him, he told himself it was just a random encounter, just a hungry child who needed food, nothing more. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. That night, as he lay in bed, her eyes haunted him. He saw them every time he closed his own. Dark, hollow, desperate eyes, staring into his soul. He had no way of knowing then, but that single act of kindness, the bread, the apple, the water, would change his life forever. Because the little girl he fed was no ordinary child, and she wasn't gone. She would come back, and when she did, she wouldn't be alone. 3 days passed. The man almost convinced himself that the little girl had been nothing more than a random encounter, a lost child, a hungry soul, nothing more. He told himself she had found her way home, maybe back to her family. That thought gave him some peace, though deep inside, he wasn't sure if he believed it. Life returned to normal, or at least it tried to. He went to work, bought groceries, watched the news, and sat alone in his apartment as always. But at night, he kept remembering her. That small body curled on the street, those haunting eyes. He tried to forget, but her image clung to his mind like a shadow that refused to leave. On the fourth evening, everything changed. It was raining hard. Thunder cracked above the city and water rushed down the glass of his window. He was preparing to sleep when there came a sound, knock, knock. The man frowned. No one visited him at this hour. In fact, no one visited him at all. His life was quiet, isolated. That knock should not have been there. Slowly, he went to the door. His hand hovered over the handle. Another knock came, louder this time. He swallowed, pulled the lock, and opened the door. And then, his breath caught in his throat. It was her. The little girl, standing in the rain. Her hair was wet, her dress stuck to her thin body. Water dripped from her arms, but her eyes, those same dark eyes, stared straight into his. For a second, neither of them moved. Then, she stepped aside. Behind her stood a woman. The man froze. The woman looked older, maybe in her late 20s, but her face was pale and thin, just like the girl's. Her clothes were torn, her hair messy, and her eyes, God, those eyes, were exactly the same as the child's. Hollow, desperate, yet filled with something unspoken, something heavy. The girl whispered softly, almost drowned by the rain. She said, "You would help us." The man blinked. His mind raced with questions. He wanted to ask 1,000 things. Who are you? Why are you here? How do you know me? But all that came out was, "Come inside, you'll get sick." He moved aside, and both stepped into the apartment. Water dripped onto his floor as they stood silently, looking out of place in his small living room. The girl hugged her mother's arm tightly, refusing to let go. The man fetched towels, offered them, and then brought what little food he had left. They ate quietly, like they hadn't eaten in days, again. He watched them, unsettled but unable to turn them away. Finally, he asked the question that burned in his chest. "Why? Why are you here?" The woman's lips pressed together. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the cup of water. For a moment, it seemed like she wouldn't answer. Then, in a soft, cracked voice, she said, "You were kind to my daughter, when no one else was." The man nodded slowly, though that wasn't really an answer. He glanced at the girl, who sat silently beside her, eating bread, and with tiny, careful bites this time. She kept glancing at the window, as though afraid someone might be watching. The woman noticed his confusion. Her gaze lowered to the table. "We have nowhere else to go." That was all she gave him. No names, no past, no explanation, just those words. The man leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning. Something about them was wrong. Not wrong like dangerous, but wrong like out of place. Their movements, their silence, even their way of looking at the world. It wasn't normal. He wanted to ask more, but the girl suddenly spoke, her voice small and fragile. "They will find us soon." The woman stiffened. Her hand shot out and grabbed the girl's arm tightly. "Enough," she whispered harshly. The man felt a chill crawl up his spine. He stared at them, his voice low. "Who will find you?" Neither answered. The girl lowered her head, and the woman looked away, her jaw tight. The room grew silent, broken only by the sound of rain outside. That night, after he offered them blankets and a place to rest, the man couldn't sleep. He sat awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. Through the thin walls, he could hear faint whispers. The mother's voice, soft and low, speaking in a language he didn't recognize. It wasn't English. The sounds were sharp, strange, almost musical yet haunting. He crept quietly to the door and peered out. The woman was standing near the window, her face turned to the sky. Her hands moved slightly, as if forming shapes in the air. The girl was asleep beside her, and the woman whispered that strange language to the stars, as if she was calling out or praying. The man stepped back into the shadows, his heart pounding. This was no ordinary family. Something about them was wrong, yet he couldn't throw them out. He couldn't abandon them. He told himself it was kindness. He told himself it was humanity. But deep down, he knew it was something else. Something he couldn't explain, because when the woman's eyes briefly turned toward him, he swore they glowed faintly in the dark. And in that glow, he saw a truth he wasn't ready to face. They didn't belong here. Not in this city. Not in this world. The next morning arrived quietly, but the man did not feel rested. Sleep had never come easily to him, but last night was different. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the woman's strange whispering. Every time he drifted toward sleep, he saw the faint glow in her eyes. Now, in the pale light of dawn, he found the girl sitting at his kitchen table. She wasn't eating. She wasn't moving much at all. She simply sat there staring at the wall, her small hands pressed against the cup of water he had given her. When she noticed him, she spoke in a hushed tone, almost like a secret. "They will find us soon." The man froze, remembering her words from the night before. His voice came out quieter than he expected. "Who will find you?" The girl opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the woman entered the room. Her presence silenced the child instantly. The girl lowered her eyes, clutching the cup tightly. The woman's expression was sharp, almost cold. "Do not trouble her with questions," she said firmly. The man frowned. "She's just a kid. She's scared. If something is wrong, I have a right to know." The woman's eyes met his. There was a weight in them, heavy and unspoken. "The less you know," she whispered, "the safer you will be." Her words sent a chill down his spine. He wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the way she said it made him hesitate. It wasn't just a warning, it was almost a plea. The room grew silent again. Later that day, as rain clouds gathered once more, the man left briefly to buy food. When he returned, he paused outside his apartment door. From inside, he heard them speaking, not English, not any language he knew. The woman's voice was low and urgent, the girl's higher, trembling. He pressed his ear closer. He couldn't to make sense of the words, but he understood the tone, fear. When he entered, they stopped instantly. The room went still. The girl stared at the floor, and the woman stood by the window, her arms folded tightly. He placed the groceries down slowly. "You don't have to hide from me," he said. No answer. That night, the whispers returned. Not prayers this time, more like warnings, and though he couldn't understand the words, he understood the meaning. They were afraid of something coming. The next evening, the man invited his neighbor over for help with a broken light. The neighbor was an older man, friendly but talkative. When he stepped inside and saw the woman and child, his face changed instantly. "You've got company, huh?" the neighbor said, his smile fading. He leaned closer and whispered so only the man could hear. "Be careful, those two. They don't belong here." The man frowned. "What do you mean?" The neighbor shook his head. "I've seen their kind before, strange ones. People who appear from nowhere, who don't fit. Keep your distance." The man wanted to laugh it off, but when he looked back at the woman, he noticed something unsettling. She was watching the neighbor with sharp, unblinking eyes, like a predator studying prey. The neighbor left quickly after that, muttering under his breath. The apartment felt heavier in his absence. That night, the man couldn't stay quiet anymore. He sat across from the woman as she braided the girl's hair. His voice was firm. "I don't care what's going on. I need to know the truth. Who are you running from?" For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, she looked at him. Her face softened, but her eyes remained heavy with something unspoken. "They are hunters," she whispered. "They will never stop until they find us." His chest tightened. "Hunters? Hunters of what?" The woman glanced at the girl and lowered her voice. "Of people. Of children. Of us." The man stared, unable to process it. "That doesn't make sense." She shook her head. "It doesn't need to make sense, only to survive." The girl pressed closer to her mother, as if the conversation itself frightened her. The man wanted to push for more, but one look at the girl's trembling hand stopped him. The fear in that room was real. He could feel it. It wasn't an act. Later that night, when he finally managed to sleep, he woke to the sound of footsteps, not inside, outside, right beyond his window. He froze, his breath shallow. Slowly, he peeked through the curtains. In the dim glow of the streetlight, he saw shadows moving, figures. Too many to be normal pedestrians. They didn't walk like neighbors, didn't move like people heading home. They scanned the street, their heads turning sharply, their movements precise, like soldiers on a hunt. His heart pounded. He stepped back from the window, careful not to make a sound. When he turned, he saw the woman already awake, standing behind him. She held the girl tightly against her chest. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she spoke without hesitation. "They are here." The man barely slept after that night. Even when the street grew quiet again, his heart refused to calm down. Those figures outside, were they really searching for the woman and her daughter? Or had his imagination turned shadows into monsters? By morning, nothing was left on the street. No footprints in the rain-soaked ground, no sign of strangers. The world looked normal again. Too normal. Inside the apartment, though, nothing felt normal. At first, it was small things. The lights flickered, even though the wiring in the building had always been fine. The radio turned on by itself, whispering static at midnight. The air in the apartment grew colder even when the heater was running. The man tried to ignore it, to tell himself it was just coincidence. But the girl noticed everything. She would stop eating, stop playing with her hands, and stare at the ceiling, like she heard something he couldn't. Once, she whispered, "They are close." It made his skin crawl. The woman, however, remained calm, or at least, she pretended to. She cooked what little food they had, folded blankets, and sat near the window almost every night, always watching, always waiting. The man wanted to ask her questions, but he knew by now she wouldn't answer, and part of him wasn't sure he wanted the answers. But then the real signs began. One evening, while the three of them sat quietly in the living room, a low hum filled the air. It was faint at first, like the sound of distant machinery. The walls vibrated slightly, the glasses on the table rattled. The girl covered her ears. "It's them," she whispered, her voice trembling. The hum grew louder, pulsing, unnatural. The man rushed to the window, but outside the street looked empty. No cars, no people, only the dark sky above. Then suddenly, the lights went out. The apartment was swallowed in darkness. The hum stopped. For a moment, the only sound was the girl's shaky breathing. Then the lights flickered back on, just as suddenly as they had gone out. The man stood frozen, staring at the ceiling. He wanted to believe it was a power issue, but deep inside, he knew better. Over the next few days, more strange things happened. At night, he heard footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment, heavy, measured, too slow to be neighbors. When he checked, no one was there. His phone would lose signal randomly, the screen glitching with static before returning to normal. Once, as he walked past a mirror, he swore he saw someone else's reflection standing behind him. Tall, broad, faceless. But when he turned, the hallway was empty. The man began to feel like his home wasn't his anymore, like he was being watched from every corner. The girl grew quieter each day. She stopped smiling, stopped trying to speak. She only held her mother's hand and stared at the sky through the window. One night, she spoke again. "They marked you." The man felt it. His chest tightened. "What do you mean, marked me?" The woman pulled her daughter closer, shaking her head. "Enough." But the words lingered in his mind. Marked. Had he already crossed a line by helping them? It all came to a peak one stormy evening. Rain hammered against the glass, thunder shaking the building. The man sat awake, unable to rest. The woman and her daughter were asleep on the couch, wrapped in blankets. And then, he heard it. A whisper. Not inside the apartment, but outside, right at the window. He froze. Slowly, he turned his head. Through the rain-streaked glass, he saw a shadow. A figure. It pressed close, its hand, or what looked like a hand, smearing across the window. The whisper grew louder, words he didn't understand, a language that sounded broken, sharp, wrong. The man's heart pounded. He jumped up, ready to shout, ready to scare it away. But when he ripped the curtains open, nothing. The balcony was empty. Only rain. But the glass was wet with a handprint, a long, twisted handprint that wasn't his. He stood frozen, his breath shaking. Then he felt it. The woman was behind him. She had woken without a sound. Her daughter clutched against her. Her eyes locked on the window, her face pale. "They found us," she whispered. That night, the man finally understood. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't imagination. Something real was happening, something far beyond him. And now, he wasn't just a witness, he was a part of it. Because by letting them in, by feeding the girl and giving them shelter, he had stepped into their world, and their world was chasing them. The man had never felt his apartment so small, so suffocating. After that night with the shadow at the window, every sound made him jump. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the fridge, even the wind rattling the glass. It all felt wrong. But what unsettled him most wasn't the noises outside. It was the silence inside. The girl barely spoke anymore. She clung to her mother like a shadow, her eyes darting to every corner as if expecting danger to burst through at any moment. And the woman, she was different now. The calm mask she wore before was cracking. Fear slipped through, showing in her eyes, in the way her hands shook when she thought no one was looking. Finally, the man couldn't take it anymore. He slammed his hand on the table one evening, startling both of them. "Enough. I need to know what's going on. I let you into my home. I gave you food, shelter. But I can't live like this. Dark whispers, strange shadows, lies. His voice broke with frustration. Tell me the truth. Who are you? For a long moment, the only sound was the storm outside. Rain streaked across the windows. The woman sat still, holding her daughter. The girl buried her face against her mother's arm, refusing to look up. Finally, the woman raised her eyes. They were tired, heavy, and older than her face should have allowed. You are right, she whispered. You deserve to know. The man leaned forward, his heartbeat quickening. The woman's voice was soft, but every word carried weight. We are not from here, not from this place, not from this world. The man froze. At first he thought he had misheard her. He stared, waiting for her to laugh, to say it was a joke. But she didn't. Her expression stayed deadly serious. Not from this world? He repeated slowly. The woman nodded once. We came from far beyond your sky, a place where people like us lived free. But then, they came. Who? The man asked. Her lips trembled as she spoke the word. The hunters. The girl shivered at the name, clutching tighter to her mother. They take what they want. They capture. They feed. We ran because we were weak, because we were prey to them. They hunt across worlds, never stopping, never showing mercy. Her voice cracked, but she forced herself to go on. I escaped with my child. We had nothing left. And when I thought we would die here, you fed her. You saved her. That is why we came to you. The man's mouth was dry. His head spun with the weight of her words. You're telling me you're not human? The woman's eyes glistened. Not as you understand it, but we are close enough to feel hunger, to feel fear, to feel the pain of losing everything. The man stood, pacing. His mind screamed at him to reject it, to call her a liar. But then he remembered the handprint on the glass, the glowing eyes, the whispers outside, the strange language she spoke to the stars. Pieces clicked together, forming a picture he didn't want to see. He turned back to her, his voice low. Why come here? Why me? The woman looked at him with a sadness so deep it felt endless. Because you showed kindness when no one else did. And now, she swallowed hard. Now you are part of it. They know you helped us. You are marked. The words struck him like ice. He staggered back, gripping the chair for balance. Marked? The girl finally spoke, her voice trembling but clear. They can smell it. On you. On us. Once you feed the hunted, you become the hunted too. Silence filled the room. Only the storm outside dared to speak. The man sat down heavily, his thoughts racing. His life, his ordinary quiet life, was gone. He wasn't just helping strangers anymore. He had stepped into a war he didn't understand. You should leave, he said suddenly. His voice shook. If they're after you, if I'm in danger, then you should go. Maybe they'll leave me alone if you're not here. The woman shook her head slowly. It is too late. They will not stop. Leaving will not save you. He felt his stomach twist. Then what am I supposed to do? For the first time, the woman's eyes softened. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as it touched his. You survive. With us. The girl looked up at him then, her eyes wide, desperate, but shining with a strange trust. And in that moment, the man realized something terrifying. He couldn't abandon them. Not anymore. Not because he was trapped, but because deep down, he didn't want to. The storm raged on outside, thunder shaking the walls. But inside, a different storm brewed, one that would change his life forever. The truth was out. They weren't ordinary. They weren't from here. And the hunters were coming. The night was too quiet, too still. The man sat awake, his back against the cold wall, while the woman and her daughter tried to sleep on the couch. But he knew they weren't truly sleeping. He could hear the girl's shallow breathing, the woman's restless shifting. None of them could rest now, not after what had been revealed. Outside, the wind fell silent. The city that usually hummed with life seemed frozen, and then he heard it. A low vibration, a hum that grew louder with every passing second. He stood quickly, his chest tight. The woman's eyes opened instantly, alert. She already knew. They are here, she whispered. The girl clung to her mother, trembling. The man rushed to the window and pulled the curtain back just a little, his breath caught in his throat. Above the neighborhood, blocking out part of the night sky, hung a massive shadow. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't anything human. The object was huge, silent and alive with faint blue lights that pulsed along its edges. He stumbled back, his heart pounding. What? What is that? The woman's voice was sharp but steady. Their vessel. They have found us. The apartment shook lightly, as if the air itself was trembling. Outside, beams of pale light swept across the streets, searching, scanning. The man felt sweat run down his neck. What do we do? The woman stood tall, holding her daughter close. We hide. We wait. And if they come... She looked at him, her eyes glowing faintly again. We fight. He swallowed hard. Fight? Against them? He was just one man, with nothing but an old hunting rifle in his closet. They had a ship the size of a building. But when the girl looked at him, eyes wide with trust and fear, he knew there was no choice. The lights grew brighter outside. Then came the sound, metallic footsteps echoing down the street. Heavy, deliberate, not human. The man grabbed his rifle and checked the chamber, his hands shaking. He had used it for hunting years ago. Never for this. The first shadow appeared at the end of the hallway outside his apartment. Tall, broad, moving with inhuman precision. Its outline looked almost human, but wrong. Too long, too sharp, too smooth. The girl gasped and hid her face in her mother's chest. The woman whispered quickly in that strange language, placing her hand on the girl's forehead. The child calmed slightly, though her eyes stayed wide with terror. Then, the knock came. Not gentle, not human, a pounding metallic knock that rattled the entire door. The man raised the rifle. His arms felt like lead, but he aimed it at the door anyway. Stay back, he hissed. The woman moved in front of the girl, her body rigid. Her voice was steady. If you open the door, we are gone. If you stand with us, they will try to kill you. Choose now. The man tightened his grip on the rifle. His fear screamed at him to run, to hide, to survive alone. But when he looked at them, the mother and child, he knew the truth. They were his now, his family. I'm not giving you up, he said through clenched teeth. The pounding grew louder. The door frame cracked. Dust fell from the ceiling. Then silence. For a moment, the world held its breath. Suddenly, the door exploded inward. A figure stepped through the smoke and splintered wood. It was massive, armored in black, with limbs too long and skin that shimmered faintly like liquid metal. Its face had no eyes, only a mouth that clicked and hissed like broken machinery. The man fired. The shot echoed through the apartment. The creature staggered, a spray of dark fluid hitting the wall. But it did not fall. It only turned, its eyeless face tilting toward him. The woman shouted something in her strange language. The creature paused, its body twitching unnaturally. For a brief second it froze, then lurched forward again. The man fired again, and again. Each shot slowed it, but didn't stop it. The girl screamed. The woman raised her hands, and suddenly the lights flickered violently. The creature jerked, its body spasming as if electricity surged through it. With a final screech, it collapsed, twitching on the floor. The man stared in shock. What did you do? The woman's face was pale, sweat dripping down her temple. What I had to. But there was no time to breathe. More footsteps echoed in the hall. More shadows moved outside the window. They won't stop, the woman whispered. The man tightened his grip on the rifle, his heart pounding. He looked at the girl crying quietly in her mother's arms, and then back at the door where more figures were approaching. He swallowed hard, fear mixing with a strange fire inside him. They'll have to go through me first. The woman looked at him, her eyes glowing brighter now. For the first time, she gave a small nod of respect. The night wasn't over. The hunters were here, and the battle had only begun. The apartment smelled of smoke and gunpowder. Broken wood and shattered glass covered the floor. The man's ears rang from the sound of his own gunshots. His chest heaved with each breath, his arms trembling as he lowered the rifle. The first hunter lay still, its twisted body leaking dark liquid that hissed when it touched the floor. But the sound outside had not stopped. Heavy steps echoed in the hallway. Shadows moved in the street beyond the broken window. There were more. The woman pulled the girl behind her, standing tall despite her shaking legs. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, her breath uneven. She had used something, power he didn't understand, to stop the creature, but he could see it had drained her. They won't stop, she said quietly, almost to herself. The man gritted his teeth. He checked the rifle. Only a few bullets left. It wouldn't be enough. Not against them. He turned to the woman. How many are there? Her face was pale. Too many. The girl clung to her mother's arm. Her voice was small but steady. We can't stay here. The pounding at the door grew louder. Another strike, another crack. Soon, more hunters would break through. The man's heart raced. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a hero. He was just an ordinary man in an ordinary apartment. And yet, when he looked at the mother and child, he knew he could not let them face this alone. "Follow me," he said, his voice sharp. He led them to the back of the apartment, toward the fire escape. Rain poured down outside, but the street below was empty for now. He motioned for them to climb down. The girl hesitated, clutching her mother tighter. The woman gave the man a long, unreadable look, then nodded and helped her daughter onto the metal steps. The man followed behind, gripping his rifle as they climbed down into the rain. The street was eerily quiet. The ship still hung above the neighborhood, its blue lights sweeping across rooftops like watchful eyes. The hum in the air made his skin crawl. They moved quickly, their footsteps splashing in puddles. Every shadow felt alive, every corner dangerous. Then the sound came again, metallic, unnatural footsteps. The man spun, raising the rifle. A hunter emerged from the alley, its tall frame moving with frightening speed. He fired. The shot echoed, striking its chest. The creature staggered but kept coming. Before it could reach them, the woman raised her hand again. The streetlights above exploded in a shower of sparks. Electricity surged through the wires, leaping into the creature's body. It shrieked, collapsing into the water with a hiss. The woman swayed, nearly falling. The man caught her arm, steadying her. Her eyes were dim now, her strength fading. "You can't keep doing that," he whispered. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I must, or they will take her." The girl squeezed her mother's hand, whispering softly, "Mama, don't." The man's chest tightened. He wished he could promise the child safety, but he couldn't, not with that ship still watching from above. They finally reached the edge of the neighborhood, a row of old warehouses by the river. The man led them inside one of the abandoned buildings, locking the door behind them. For the first time all night, there was silence, only the sound of dripping water and their own heavy breathing. The woman sat against the wall, holding her daughter close. The girl leaned into her, exhausted but still awake. The man set his rifle down, his hands shaking. He stared at them, then at the broken doorway they had come through. "Why me?" he asked suddenly. His voice was hoarse, filled with a mix of anger and fear. "Out of everyone, why come to me?" The woman looked at him, her eyes glistened in the dim light. "Because you fed her, because you cared. That is enough to make you part of us now." Her words sank deep into him. He wanted to deny it, to push them away, but he couldn't. He saw the girl's face, pale and tired, but filled with a fragile trust. He had already chosen. The moment he gave her that bread, his life had changed forever. Hours passed. The ship above slowly drifted away, its lights fading into the clouds. The footsteps in the streets grew distant, until finally, the night returned to silence. The man sat with his back against the wall, rifle in his lap. His body ached, his eyes heavy, but he didn't let himself sleep. He kept watch, listening for any sound. The girl eventually drifted into sleep, curled against her mother's side. The woman's eyes stayed open, meeting his across the dark room. "Thank you," she whispered. The man shook his head. "It's not over." "No," she agreed softly. "It has only begun." Morning came, gray and heavy. The streets outside were empty, but the memory of last night still lingered in the air. The man led them back toward his apartment cautiously, but he knew nothing would ever be the same. His home was no longer just his quiet life was gone. Now he was part of something larger, something terrifying. The girl held his hand as they walked, her grip small but strong. The woman walked beside them, her face tired but resolute. For the first time in years, the man didn't feel alone. But deep inside, he knew the truth. The hunters would return, and when they did, the fight would be bigger, harder, and darker than anything he could imagine. Because feeding a starving child had tied him to a war that spanned beyond Earth, and wars like that never end quietly.